Hey everybody, my name is Locke. Welcome to Deep Dive. This is a very special episode. I have two awesome guests. One who you've seen before. This is Larry. Larry, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Larry Kuperman, Director of Business Development for Nightdive Studios.
And our esteemed guest today is Evan Lahti of PC Gamer. Evan, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Thanks a lot, Locke. Really good to be with you. I'm the Strategic Director at PC Gamer, and before that, I was Editor-in-Chief. Been at PC Gamer since 2008, so really glad to be speaking on this topic with you today.
Yeah, so Larry, you've been cooking up some questions that you guys are going to toss back and forth, but kind of our main theme here is sort of the state of the games industry, as there have been some shifts in how people, the working situations for a lot of people. So Larry, I'll kind of pass the ball to you and let you take it away.
Thank you. So the first thing that I wanted to say is in the interest of full disclosure. Evan and I have a more than professional relationship. I don't mean to make that sound creepy at all, but when I go back home to Michigan, Evan is one of the professional contacts that I always see, and we usually manage to break bread, or since it's Michigan, break the crust of pizza together.
Or a pasty, yeah, that's good.
There we go. Just wanted to put that out there. And we've worked together for many years. Evan, how do we begin to describe the state of gaming journalism today?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, from our perspective, contradiction of good and bad, of best of times, worst of times, and I think it's no coincidence that that's the same line that we've been using for the games industry, unfortunately, at large for the last year or so, with all the layoffs that have pervaded different studios. So, certainly there's been some meaningful and very disappointing contractions among many of our peers who have either laid off or closed entirely. Most recently, we were surprised to see outlets like Dexerto, eliminate some staff, unfortunately, as well as their Call of Duty focused coverage over on Charlie Intel. And, from our perspective, so many of these folks were producing really great work, of course, and it has very little reflection on, their talent. Of course, there's such an amazing group of talent out there. But for me, it's really the macro economic stuff. It's the macro media environment stuff as much as anything. And it's easy to litigate individual corporate ownership, and certainly our friends at Kotaku have been in a many years long battle with their ownership very publicly, to such an extent that I think multiple editors in chief now have sort of directed criticism at the CEO over there, unfortunately. So there's that, right? That's not great.
Yeah.
At the same time, I would also say, right, gaming is just unbelievably vibrant right now.
Yeah.
The volume of stuff, the frequency of activity, the player creativity in the games that we're playing, it does lend itself, fortunately, to tremendous coverage and volumes of it. So, from where I'm sitting, it's a very fun place to be in that sense. We have a surplus permanently of good things to think about, write about, cover, questions to ask, right? And interesting new developers, essentially every week, every month, that are sort of coming onto the scene with a new studio announcement, a new game, right? That's a lot of activity. It's really fun to inhabit that. But yeah, and we can dig into this for sure. The macro media environment stuff is volatile, if you want to put it politely.
Yeah. I think about the poor people who worked for Game Informer, who worked for Kotaku Australia, who not only lost their jobs, but all record of their work for years for some of them is just gone into the ether. I can't imagine that. I mean, we're all pretty creative people. I guess my follow-up question is, how did we get here? Is it corporate greed? Is it changes in the gaming ecosystem? Is it cultural? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Larry. And Game Informer deserves special mention because they were such a pillar, and you have kind of firsthand experience. Of course, Larry, kind of being in the orbit of a publication like that. I'm sure you have an insight or two to share there. But truly, like, the mainstay publication, at one point in Game Informer's history, sometime in the 2000s, and partly because of their subscription scheme, they were outperforming Better Homes and Gardens in the United States, which means they had millions of subscribers, right? In print, right? Really amazing. So, it's such a tremendous team over there, and many of them have gone on to do independent stuff or consulting work, other meaningful work. I happen to run a fantasy hockey league for games industry folks, and we have a couple of
Nice.
really great folks like Matt Burt's in there and other members of their team formerly. So I have a lot of affection for them, and they were doing it in Minnesota too. Gosh, like, that's such a wonderful. As Midwesterners, I think I want to just sort of cast a little light on that too. So, look, in their case, right, and Larry, gosh, like, you're better placed to speak about this than me. When your company becomes a meme stock, that is not a stable environment fundamentally, right? And the kind of resulting business decisions we've seen GameStop make in the last, since 2020, 2021, they have not reflected, right, the priority of coverage and journalism, right, and that history, unfortunately. So I think you're right that in that case, it's definitely ownership is to blame.
Just for the record, for anyone that might not be aware of it, and again, in full disclosure, prior to joining Nightdive Studios, I was what's the word I'm looking for? Unemployed. But before that, for 2 years, I managed PC Digital for GameStop. I was brought on during their acquisition of Impulse from Stardock, a Michigan-based company. I had been part of the team at Stardock, segued over with Impulse, and I was part of the team at GameStop. And again, this was before the memes started. We were a $50 million a year business unit. Unfortunately, when you're a $50 million a year business unit on a $9 billion a year revenue, you are a rounding error. And I not only lost my job, my boss and good friend Steve Nix, he went out the door before I did, and then the bulk of the people that were attached to that group that had switched over from Stardock to GameStop also lost their jobs because the decision was made that they didn't believe in digital, that they really believe that they've seen the future and it looked just like the 1950s. That's it. That's the meme stock peril. But that's not the only headwind that gaming journalism is facing. I wonder how much of this is also due to the rise of the streamer. When I started in the business, advertising in print media for your new game was not something that was elective. That was the only way that you let gamers know that your game was out there. I mean, this was before Steam. This is when people bought their games in boxes at retail stores, and so your relationship with print media, in particular, PC Gamer among others, was actually crucial to not just your success but your livelihood. That's the only way that people knew that you existed. You'd have to beg and cajole to get a review in a magazine. And today you have the streamers, and it's funny. I was just talking to somebody that we both know in the media, and he said that he was doing an article on the ethics of influencers, and my response was, "Oh, so a short piece."
Damn.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, even that being said, Larry, I think there is quite the spectrum on the streamers slash influencers. There's going to be a spectrum of credibility and ethics in terms of, on this side you have basically a paid advertisement, and then this side you have, people that actually want to, I guess, be credible or what have you. But the joke doesn't pass me by.
And I don't mean to knock. I don't mean to. I mean, certainly with the scandal this week with whatever his name, Asman on Twitch, and I don't. That's irrelevant in terms of the details. But what is important is the impact that streaming had, taking audience away from more traditional media.
Totally.
And Evan, your thoughts? Is that kind of greasing the skids?
Yeah, it's I think a lot of my peers 10 years ago, 5 years ago would say like they would have strictly viewed it as like an adversarial relationship with streamers. There are so many of them. They're popular, they're visible, right? And they're very entertaining at large, right? And of course, now it's very hard to generalize about all of them in the ways that I just did. But like that is, of course, threatening, I think, to some people with our backgrounds that like, these are sort of the popular kids to some extent. And we are, by nature, to some extent, more introverted writers, thinkers, critics, more insular in kind of how we reflect on gaming. Certainly I've heard a number of reflections from some of my peers that they were like particularly kind of rolling their eyes at the kind of the era of YouTuber who would just sort of scream at video games. And I think we understand now that was really, that sort of thing was targeted at, young children, for example, right? And it's just not black and white. Not that you're framing it that way, Larry, but like truly, like we're just part of the ecosystem with them. And I think we've come to realize that like it's a pretty good and interesting ecosystem to us from PC gamers' perspective, right? Like news is probably our highest volume activity. It's the thing that we do most often. And news is essentially something that streamers don't do or can't do in the way that we do it, at least. Certainly they can break things down, they can deliver analysis, they can even, of course, like do journalism, and some of them absolutely do. Not that that is like the utmost golden standard for what anybody has to do. Of course, we just believe that there's a lot of spectrum within there to do different types of things that are meaningful and impactful. So, I think the way we've seen things kind of calcify in the last few years is, streamers use our articles to react to stuff, and we use their videos to write articles to some extent, right? Based on their reaction, based on them reflecting something about the community. Like the dynamic of a particular streamer representing a particular game, kind of being the unofficial spokesperson or critic of that game, like that's fascinating to me, right? That like someone unpaid can kind of become that face, right? Just by nature of kind of how they speak to the game, how they inhabit it for a number of years, and their level of dedication, right? So to me, like I sort of view it with that a little bit of a detachedness, as hopefully a good journalist does, that like these are just interesting figures that are a part of our culture. We sometimes collaborate with them. I can talk more about that, and we use them as interview sources in some cases, but we view them as another source of information and news.
I find that not only fascinating, Evan, but truly positive on that. It sounds like we've done that dialectic, thesis and antithesis, and we've come up with a synthesis.
Yeah, and what I would tack on really quick is like the distinction I make all the time, Larry, to our team is like, you think a PC gamer and you think we might sort of be a specialist, like we cover one platform, I guess, right? But I think within actually the media landscape of games, we are a generalist. We cover all types of games. We do reviews, news, previews, interviews. We go to events. We do video stuff. We do our own live stream broadcast, the PC gaming show, right? Like we're kind of a kitchen sink of activities, like many of our peers who have all these different sections and editors and like specialists and beats that they're covering. And if you compare that to what is a sea of specialists in streamers in large, right? Like people who typically are either doing one sort of thing or even just playing one game for like 5 years straight, right? And they are deeply invested in that type of thing that they're doing, right? So when you think about it that way, like those things can definitely coexist and both have a really strong purpose.
I'm really glad that you mentioned the PC gaming show, because I would lose my membership in the Sales Guys Club if I didn't mention that fans of Nightdive should certainly watch the PC gaming show on December 5th. Won't say any more about that. On the topic of streamers, we're also, I was going to say dependent, but there are certain streamers that when we release a new game, we watch their videos to get the sense of how our game really plays.
Right. Focus testing to some extent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll mention people that we've had long relationships with. G-Man Lives. Absolutely love his sense of humor and sarcasm. John Linneman, better known as Digital Foundry. I watch his videos to find out what I did wrong. He always finds something, and it's always good. So we do have those relationships. But Evan, when you and I first met, I think the first presentation that we ever did together, I said, to me, the gaming industry is like a three-legged stool. There's developers, there's publishers, and then there's the media. There's critics, and the media are responsible for letting gamers know what they should play, what they shouldn't play, what they're going to like, and what they're not going to like, and that seems to be a vital part of it. So when I ask, what can be done, I mean, the idea of a synthesis between PC Gamer that originally started life as a print magazine, but has now evolved into something bigger than that, and working with that's fascinating to me. I think you've really hit on something there.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing to hear. Just like, I know we were joking off camera, Evan, about like Hunt, but if you needed someone, there are those people that is the one thing they do, and you can be like, hey, what is going on with this new map that came out, right? If say you weren't immersed in that, you could leverage them and be like, talk to me about what this means for this game. And then even though you are, as you said, the kitchen sink, you're able to sort of pull those anecdotes and those nuggets of information. That's amazing, that symbiotic relationship there.
Yeah, and the way you pointed out, Locke, right? I mean, not that we figured it out, but I think any good business or operation is hopefully not resisting the kind of general direction of travel of an industry, right?
Totally.
And part of what you're talking about is games are deeper than they've ever been.
And there's so many of them.
Right. And so games can sustain one person playing them for 5 years straight, 8 hours a day, like hundreds of those, thousands of those people, I think, right?
Yeah.
And that's a testament to what you all are doing, Larry, that these games are deep and interesting enough and nuanced enough to sustain people's interest for that long. But it definitely makes for a more fragmented landscape. And this is something I talk a lot about. And I this does relate to media to some extent, but what did gaming feel like in 2010, would you say, right? 2012? I would say roughly blockbusters came out and people played them, right?
Yep.
We all played Borderlands 2, we all played Mass Effect 3, we all played Dragon Age, right? Like that kind of, I'm generalizing massively, but like that feels broadly true to me. And I would say we're in a very different environment today, right? Where, we have the data to back it up that people are playing older games, games that are 4, 5, 6 years old in terms of the amount of the time that they're spending in them. That's like a majority of their time, it seems to be. And, the blockbusters, so to speak, are enjoying, well, maybe not enjoying, depending on who you ask, parity with independent developers, right? And that's thanks to digital distribution, right? So that change in particular is an interesting one. I think it's like fragmentation of not just games, but really all entertainment, right? You think about how many times have you experienced this in the last year? Someone being like, "Oh, have you listened to this podcast? Oh, I'm watching this show on Netflix," and you've never heard of it,
Right.
right? So our experiences are becoming less universal, right? As just people who enjoy stuff and enjoy media and do media, right? And I think any organization just has to respect that is the direction of travel. And just what does that mean for any of us?
I joined the industry in February of 2001, and I was there for the transition from purely physical to digital. And I've spoken about this on a number of occasions. People do not realize how much that impacted not just the way games are sold, which is obvious, but how games were made. Because if you were making a game in 2001 and it wasn't going to be on the shelves at Best Buy, at Walmart, at Electronics Boutique, you were done. And I remember pitching games to the buyers at Walmart. That was an experience that I'm glad we don't need to relive. Things like marketing development funds, MDF. For those in our audience, for the young ones out there, MDF was the blackmail that you pay to retailers so that they would position your game somewhere above the bottom shelf. I mean, that's just the way it was. But the number of options that we had was much smaller. The reason that it was the blockbuster games, Evan, is because that was all that people could find. And there was that. That said, the challenge for media went from covering 6 games a month to
39 a day. 39 a day on Steam right now, if you're curious this year.
Crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. 14,000 a year.
Yeah. So I understand that there's a little bit of a challenge. And again, for all of my sarcasm about streamers and influencers, they provide a truly vital service and a different level of exposure to the games. I do want to call out that PC Gamer seems to have survived this period of time in much better condition than many of your competitors. I'm going to suggest that your leadership is at least partially responsible for that. I told you in anticipation of this meeting that I had every intention of embarrassing you, so there it is. But you have been successful. Anything that you would put out to the wider media that maybe practice they should adopt?
Thanks, Larry. I think certainly I have to say, and yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true to the extent that like PC Gamer's team has never ever been bigger. So certainly like we're very happy about that. It's enabling us to do new and more interesting things that we're really excited about. So I guess, yeah, to some extent, I want to use your comment to like push back a little bit against like the complete doom and gloom of this notion that the games media is dying or evaporating. Like if you look at IGN, Polygon, GameSpot, ourselves and several others, like we're all producing really meaningful work. And certainly like in the independent sense, there are great documentarians, people who used to be journalists doing amazing stuff on Patreon and elsewhere, NoClip, for example, I'm sure you've been acquainted with and probably been the subject of, I think. Yeah. That's right. I'm remembering now. So, yeah, I think like, PC Gamer has been the beneficiaries of, well, the fact that, hey, PC gaming won the console war, as we declared a few years ago. PC gaming is the de facto best platform. So certainly from that perspective, we are in a position every day where we get to cover the highest performance, highest end aspects of gaming. but also the most interesting, fringe, creative, weird modders, people doing weird stuff in Factorio or whatever, right? Like, we really get access to the full spectrum in that regard, in addition to like the conventional commercial stuff, which is interesting too.
Locke, was it just me when Evan said weird and fringe? Was he staring at me, or was that just the only?
I think you're part of the normal now, Larry. I think it's gone beyond you to be weird.
I will tell you in 2010, before I joined Nightdive. In fact, before Nightdive was had ever gotten off the ground, conceived, I was part of bringing back Total Annihilation. We brought that back, and ironically, the license, or at least part of the license for distribution on that was held by Atari, a firm I now know very well.
Yeah.
But when I first contacted them and said, "Hey, we've got this idea. We're going to need to reverse engineer it, but we can do that, and it shouldn't be lost. It's work." And I remember Atari saying to me one question: "Why? Why would anyone want to bring back an old game?" And I think we've adequately answered that. So that said, I mean, there are services. I mean, I work with PC Gamer on a very frequent basis. All the times that I've worked with people over there, I've never asked for a favor. I have never asked for a positive review. I have never asked to see a review before it was printed. Nor have I ever done that with.
That's good, because we wouldn't do that. Yeah.
nor have I ever done that with any other media outlet either. It wasn't
Right.
just PC Gamer. I kind of believe in those rules, and I believe in the importance of a free and unimpeded press for everything, but for games as well.
Yeah. And I want to say, Larry, without interrupting you too much, hopefully, like that is welcome and refreshing. I think in terms of like the streamer media divide, again, like I have a really positive perspective on it. But I would say, like, to some extent, the activities of some game publishers, not all, like it's a smaller number, and I think it tends to be the biggest publishers typically. Their outreach, to some extent, is pointed at that group, right? Because to some extent it represents a bigger group. It's just more people, it's, 10 outlets in the US, maybe 20, 30 worldwide. And then it's hundreds and hundreds of streamers, right? I can understand why they have influencer relationship managers, of course. That's a really challenging piece of work. But yeah, I mean, without grousing, like it's true that, sometimes when we go to these like events to play games and get access, they're sort of tailored towards streamers, right? Rather than, historically, like back in the 2010s, 2015 or so, typically we go to these events, we'd have as much time as possible to play a game. And then we have like interviews, we'd have presentations and stuff, a lot of opportunity to ask questions and do things like that. And the itinerary for some of these events now, it tends to be focused on recording footage.
Yeah.
And they'll often have webcams set up to allow streamers to, deliver the best content for their channels and whatnot, which I totally understand. But, to some extent, they become kind of exercises in dissemination of that, rather than, I don't know, critically inspecting. And again, I think there's room for both, absolutely. But this is some of the feedback we're kind of circulating back and forth to say, hey, like, we're huge, and we want to talk to you. We want to like have time to like ask you the questions that matter to our audience. And like, by the way, headlines with quotes in them are like the most read things on our website. So you probably would like to talk with us. Yeah.
I've built an entire career out of being quotable.
No kidding. Yeah,
for better or worse.
No, thanks. In the parlance of The Simpsons, yeah, you put my kids through college. with your musings. No, yeah, and I don't know, like, to coming back to some of our earlier conversation, like what's changed and what can be done. It's two really important questions, and I guess like for anybody who's interested in entering games media or is currently in it, I guess I would say like I perceive actually lots of room to make an impact. Um, you know, the number of figures who are delivering, well, look, like I think there's a temptation to say like investigative journalism is like the highest form, right? It's the ultimate thing you can do. It's the most serious and the most like, you know, challenging. You're potentially like bringing down empires and whatnot. And absolutely, like investigative journalism is something we value and like that has a place in any industry. However, I would just say that like there are so many different varieties and colors of writing, and that are not journalism or that overlap a little bit with journalism, and video is part of that as well. And I think like certainly, you know, like the rise of the video essay has been interesting to watch on YouTube, and Locke, I'm sure you're like well acquainted with that format and have some thoughts on it. But like, you know, to me, like as much as there are some like really amazing established voices, I would say like every year there's like new people doing new stuff that you've never seen before, right? And I think that again is the kind of direction of travel for our industry, and it should hearten anybody that like, how do I break in? How do I do something? Well, like many others are and seem to be achieving that, you know. And certainly like from like a hiring and manager perspective, we are always looking for reliable, informed, curious, you know, people who take initiative. And, you know, we struggle to find enough of them because there are so many damn games, right? Yeah. So, you know, I can't speak for all of my peers at IGN and elsewhere, but like I'm pretty sure they're in the same boat that like finding people to write really good news stories is hard. Finding people to write really excellent, authoritative, on time reviews with like a great sense of rhythm to their writing, and also like that people who understand Battlefield deeply over the last 10 years. Like that is an exotic animal you're looking for, right? So in terms of finding work in that sense, like we're always looking for those types of people, and they're challenging for us to find just inherently, right? So I just want to sort of put a little bit of sunlight on that. Yeah, hopefully that's welcome.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we didn't touch on, and I'm glad you brought up investigative journalism. One of the things that's also happened that perhaps is below the radar for some people is the integration of gaming media into mainstream media.
Yeah.
I'm gonna certainly mention Jason Schreier over at Bloomberg. I mean, consistently excellent work. I will say about Jason. We in the industry love him. We enjoy. He's one of the journalists that people in the industry read all the time. But given the nature of the work that he does, I'm okay that he doesn't write about Nightdive. We're always too boring. There are no scandals, no layoffs. So as long as we keep it that way, I'll read about Jason reviewing somebody else's work.
I want to turn back. I can't help myself but interview while being interviewed.
Please do. Please do.
You know, certainly, I think some people have this sense that we have like a really adversarial, or I don't know, depending on who you ask, adversarial or like too close relationship with game developers. And of course, the truth is like much more boring and much simpler. But you know, certainly there are plenty of instances of like developers being upset by something we wrote, a headline or a review or a story, and we have to have a conversation with them. So I just want to maybe invite you to share a little bit of it from your perspective, like, and maybe even hypothetically, or you know, you don't have to speak directly from Nightdive, Larry. Like, what stories do you fear? Do you like worry about that keep you up at night? Which types of headlines like sort of rub you the wrong way? And again, not necessarily your company in particular, but like I'm curious more how the industry perceives the press in that regard.
That is an absolutely fantastic question, almost as though you're used to being on the other side of the interview. So the only thing that upsets me is when an interview was not an interview, when a review of a game begins with the words, "I didn't actually play it." That's the only one that then why are you bothering to write it? Or when people will begin with saying, I don't like this genre of games, then perhaps there's somebody else that at the magazine that will do that. That said, in 25 years of being in the business, from Stardock to GameStop, to over a decade at Nightdive, I have never not taken a call from the media. There are times that I've said, "Hey, it's the release week. I can't do this 12-page interview that you wrote up for me. Sounds great, but I can't release a game and write a book at the same time for you." Um, uh, that happens, but other than that, um, I think by and large we get treated fairly in the press. If there's an article about sexual harassment at a company, if there's an article about layoffs or failed games, I read those too, and I don't think, oh, it was unfair to write that up. Again, I'll share a Nightdive example. When we laid off the original System Shock team, and I was the one that made the statement that wrote out that we had put System Shock on hiatus. I can't tell you what that weekend was like for me. We gave the initial interview on Friday afternoon. On Saturday, the rest of the media caught up with it. On Sunday, Europe chimed in. Monday was Asia Day for me, and I just swear I thought everyone would know what the word hiatus meant. Perhaps I should have chosen a different word. That's how vocabulary can get you into trouble, kids. But that said, it was really rough. I mean, it really was. I did not sleep well for that week, but it was fair. I mean, they were reporting on what happened, and when System Shock came back, and when we were able to demo, saying, "Hey, look, I don't want you to believe me. I want you to play the game and see the progress that we've made." You and Wes Fenlon were the first two people that played System Shock at GDC.
Right.
Again, I believe that my relationship for 2.5 decades with the games media has been fair.
Yeah, I guess one of the things too in starting this show is to bridge the other gap between consumer and developer, because that also has a giant chasm between it.
Mm.
Which I think there are so many untold stories, personalities, so many talented people that um, have really interesting things to say. And I guess in doing something like deep dive and shows like this and chats like this, just bridging that gap with the consumer so that there's less of a um, not knee jerk reaction, but a little more like when something turns out a certain way, you have a little bit of context and nuance behind why this game turned out a certain way or the choices that were
Yeah.
made here, because we're so used to, again, going back 10 years, we've been conditioned in the last decade to immediately react. And I think, Larry, it might have been on John Melchior's interview where he's like, people will remember if you release the bad game, not if you delay the good game, right? So
That's right.
there's such a knee-jerk reaction to when a game gets released and everyone's trying to get their take on it. But again, bridging that gap with the people who comment on YouTube, whether that's a losing battle or not. But I
Yeah.
genuinely think that there is some work to be done there in being able to say, hey, I was a developer on Killing Time. this is why I did this.
That's
And I
right.
think, painting those people in a certain light, or just giving them the chance to speak to their talents and their work is a really important thing.
We in the industry created that black box, and we created that box with a certain intentionality. We
Absolutely.
wanted our game releases to seem magic. There wasn't this game before, and now there is.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to say we had a team of 40 people working on this for 3 years.
Mhm.
During that time, Joe's wife got sick and he had to leave, and Sandra had to step in his place, and Sandra made
Or
different
just like have that
choices.
pop up in the middle of the game as text for context, right? Like that's a good experience, right?
I'm thinking about that's a direction that we might go in for the
Yeah.
next one, the next 3DO title that we release. You know, that said, I think that podcasts like this, certainly it's been our intention with the deep dive to pull that curtain back and to let some light in on it. I will tell you that just in general, when things happen in gaming that seem inexplicable, it's because there's something that you don't know behind the curtain. I'll give you an example of a thing that happened. We were heading up to a release of a major title. It was around holiday time. We are working with First Party being the name for the bucket designation for Xbox and PlayStation and Switch. We were working with them. We thought we had all of our ducks in the row. And then we get a person, not an organization, a person explaining that they go on holiday vacation at a different time. And so that thing that you thought was going to happen, that's not going to happen on schedule. Good luck.
It's always funny that all the horror stories are basically boiled down to time and or budget. So
Yeah.
I think that's a generalization that's true for
It is.
most things. The last thing I have to tell you is one of my reveals, and Evan, you might get a kick out of this. Over a decade ago, I was in Iceland. I was at ParadoxCon. We were a whole group of us. I think I was representing GameStop, but a whole group of us were on a bus. And it was the first time that I heard a young man say that what he did was he played games on YouTube and he sold advertising for them. And I loudly said, "Oh, come on. Nobody's going to want to watch anybody else play some game on YouTube. I mean, that's ridiculous." And that's how I met Angry Joe.
Okay.
Except I think before I said that to him, I think he was just regular Joe. I think I was the one that made him angry.
Wow.
So just goes to show what I know and what I don't know.
That's a great pull. I love that. I like to tell people, Larry, that I'd been streaming since Justin TV, and most people don't know what that means.
Wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. And as a former San Francisco resident, I had a former girlfriend who worked at Justin TV, which is like a requirement of anybody who lives in that city.
Yeah.
So excellent.
They still use those email addresses. I think that's the other thing that's funny.
It's a merit badge for sure.
Yeah.
Status symbol.
I think we're at that point now, Evan. I'm gonna ask you, and then I'll take the other half of it. If someone was starting out in the industry, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, in games media, I would say specificity. And to some extent, that's also true of games. That's a quality that we value. People who can deliver a perspective that is theirs, that is memorable in one way or another. It can be funny, intellectual, academic, incisive, verbose. Thinking of Tim Rogers. I don't know if you guys know Tim Rogers, who ran actionbutton.net. He's now a game developer, but famously was writing like 4,000 word, 6,000 word reviews of games. And that was just sort of his thing, right? And some people didn't know what to make of it or didn't enjoy it, but like it was his identity, right? And the specificity of that helped make him known. It helped kind of him find that voice, right, in particular. And I think in media, again, from like a talent perspective, like we value people who are able to deliver something packaged like that and clear to the audience. But I think also just the marketplace does, right? If you think about, just look at YouTube as a landscape, right? It tends to be one person doing one thing, right? And often they're helped by a team of people behind the scenes and whatever. But like, it's the repetition of, okay, when a channel usually starts out, it's like finding its footing, or maybe they're trying 10 different things, but they usually end up doing the one thing that is kind of truest to their personality and their voice. So, I think it's that, it might take you years to kind of find that voice and kind of how you fit into this ecosystem, whether it's, video essays or, I don't know, turning games into something playful on YouTube that is, I think certainly about like, I don't know if you guys have heard this channel called Let's Game It Out. It's a really good one where they do, like just unbelievably insane scenarios in games like The Sims and, Trackmania, just like trying to break the games in ways that are just against the laws of physics or like immoral, turning your Sims game into a prison is of course like a long-standing tradition, but like that is a kind of voice, right? And I think to me that's what I would encourage any young person like entering media to be doing. It's certainly like, and again, if you just extend this idea outside of games, like that's what people on TikTok do. They have a shtick, right, Larry? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of lectures on building your brand, both from a corporate perspective and from an individual perspective, and I do talk about relations with media, finding the people who review games similar to what you are making, finding people who review those games positively, and building a network of those people. That's great. The other thing that I tell people, and I hope there are some young listeners that will get benefit from this. The most important thing that you can do can be summarized in 3 words. Should be somebody's slogan. Just do it. If you're looking to be a game developer, join game jams. Build up a portfolio of your work, and then if you're looking to be in games media, start doing Medium, start doing blogs, get your work out there, build a resume that when you go to someone like Evan or when you apply to a Larry at Nightdive, you can say, this is the work that I've done.
I just want to, and you're so right, because I have to imagine, because I was this person in like 2006, like, oh, the industry's so big, it's impenetrable, it's all these like 30-year-old publications like PC Gamer. How could I possibly? No, like our emails are public. Our LinkedIn page is public. Like, I'm surprised that more people don't reach out to us with sorts of like requests for professional help or students. And I do occasionally get them, but like we are unbelievably accessible and there's so much room for new voices. I just have to stress that. Like,
I think it can be really,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Evan. I think it can be really intimidating, especially in this day and age where you have to be a comedian, you have to be a video editor, you have to be a writer, and it can be really intimidating on all fronts, being like, a social media manager again, and just where do you start? And I would just say, like, just be curious about a thing and do what makes you feel good, whether that's like you said, writing a video essay, filming yourself talking, do an audio note, like anything. It's when you said curiosity, that resonated with me, just because like there's so many things out there that not everything can be covered by everyone. So if you have a take, or if you have something you are passionate about, like say something about it, because that then you'll be able to say, hey, I wrote something on this, or I filmed and did this video on this, or write a song about that, and find your voice just by doing it more and more. So,
I'm sure what is daunting, and you're right to kind of tap into this, Locke, right, is when we grew up, people in our 30s or 40s or older, right? Who did we have to compare ourselves against when we were kids, when we were sort of in our 20s, right? it was our school,
Yep.
it was our neighborhood, it was our friend group. Like those are our sort of our peers, our competitors to some extent, right? And you knew like, well, I'm the best at basketball in my school, or I'm the third best at math,
Mhm.
right? And that meant something. And I definitely, not to make it too sociological, I do understand how people might feel daunted or discouraged in an environment where they have the entire world effectively. And the world is expressing constantly a scoreboard of
Mhm.
who is the most watched, most read, and these are the things that the platforms value, so they become our values, and that's a little bit unsettling, right? So I just think we have to let the reason we make work of any kind be more than just satisfying those platforms, hopefully,
Yeah.
and understanding that like there are other forms of value, certainly. And again, if someone out there is just, their personality has led them to a place where they're going to make like video essays in the style of Shakespeare, that are 4 minutes long, about Japanese imported versions of games that never released in the US. Like awesome, like show me that. I want to see that specificity, that sense of someone who they are and deeply embedded in their work, right?
Yeah.
And I just think there's room for all kinds of stuff like that out there still.
I'm taking notes on that one because the Shakespeare part
This
resonated
is
with
Larry's
me.
YouTube channel.
As we get up to the conclusion, the last thing I just want to emphasize is that if there are people listening to this that need help, there are a lot of us industry veterans that are perhaps more accessible than you might think. I mean, I'm wearing this T-shirt. I'm wearing this T-shirt, and they let me run the company. So
Yeah.
there you go. Evan, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, great to be with you guys. Again, I think it's just really special what you're doing to spotlight the experience of making games. And like you said, it's something we all collectively want to lift up on, help people improve the understanding of how games are made, the work that goes into them, the challenges developers face. If people want to have a sense of what PC Gamer's up to, certainly it's our website, it's our social feeds, like everybody else, but certainly the PC Gaming Show coming on December 5th. It's the PC Gaming Show Most Wanted, where we're going to be talking through and counting down the 25 most wanted games for 2025 and beyond. So, yeah, that'll be exciting. It's a really crowded landscape right now. We're kind of looking forward to seeing where games like, Grand Theft Auto, Civilization, Killing Floor from our friends at Tripwire, like plenty of contenders in that mix there. So, we're going to hope to kind of continue to expand that fun December moment with the Game Awards in terms of producing broadcasts that are really fun and meaningful at that time of year.
Maybe something about the thing. Sorry, I had something caught in my
Oh,
throat.
right. Is that a placeholder title? What do you mean by the thing?
It's just the thing. Awesome. And as always, thank you, Larry. It's always I always appreciate you setting these up and have come and take a while, sit a while and listen and to Larry's stories around the campfire. But truly though, it's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for making this happen. Evan, thanks again, and I'll see you next month.
Looking forward to it.
So yeah, thank you again so much on behalf of Larry, Evan, and myself, Locke. This has been Deep Dive, and we'll catch you all again sometime. Bye-bye.